We're in the Mishnah on Daf Tes. Zok the Mishnah. Ein chayshishin. We are not concerned. Shema gerer a chulda. That perhaps a weasel would drag the chametz mibayis lebayis from one house to another. So after a person does bedike in one place in his house, so maybe you can be afraid that you would done bedike there, but a weasel or whatever it is will drag the chametz from one place to another. So you're not chayshish for that. Not from one corner to another, not from a house to a house. You did bedike in one house, but in the other house next door you didn't do bedike, and a chulda, a weasel, will come and carry the chametz from one house to another. Or mimakim l'makim, from one place to another. If you're going to be concerned about this, so then why not be concerned that we're dragging chametz from one courtyard to another, or mi'ir li'ir, or it would take the chametz from one city to another city, and ein l'davasayf? There's no end to what you have to be concerned about. So therefore, this is something that Chazal did not make a takana for. Right? The point over here is, when the Chachamim made their takana for bedikas chametz, they made their takana bedikas chametz only for something that it's possible to address, possible to take care of. If it's something that you can't take care of because it's ein l'davasayf, so they didn't include it in the takana in the first place. Okay, so according to most Mefarshim, Rashi and most Mefarshim, this Mishnah here is talking about a case after a person did bittul. So Menatayre, he's not being given by Yirah by Yamatzah. The Rabbanan, the Takana of Chachamim, what did they include in their Takana? Did they also include this issue? You should be concerned about a chulda carrying things from place to place. So the Mishnah is saying, no, that's a kind of thing that you anyways can't fully address. So if you can't fully address it, it's a concern that Chachamim L'chatchila didn't include in their Takana. Says the Gemara, Taime, the reason why we're not concerned about a chulda, a weasel, dragging the chametz from one place to another, the lechazina de shakal, because you didn't see him dragging it. That's what the Mishnah is talking about. It's a chashash, that maybe there was a chulda that came and dragged it. Chazina de shakal. But in a case where you saw a chulda came and dragged your chametz, chayshinan, then you are concerned. You saw a chulda bringing chametz into your house that you already checked, so you have to go and do bedika again. Uboy bedika, you have to search your house again to see where the chulda placed the chametz. So asks the Gemara, but why do you have to be concerned? Why can't we rely on the fact that this weasel that dragged the chametz ate it up? Why would we rely on the fact that it ate it up? So the Gemara brings a Mishnah as a source for this. Milait nan, haven't we learned in the Mishnah? Medurais ha'akim, the places where goyim live. Tumeim, it has a status of tumah. Chachamim were geyser tumah on them. What's the reason for this? Because the places where goyim live, if there's a miscarriage, there's a stillborn, and they have to bury a baby, they'll bury the baby right there in the house where they live. They're not going to go somewhere else to bury. They'll bury it right there in their house. So therefore there's a concern. You enter into their house, there's a stillborn buried there, and therefore the whole oihel, the whole tent becomes tummy, the whole place becomes tummy. V'kama yishe b'moder v'yehei moder tzarich b'dike. How long should a guy be living there that you're concerned about this, that there could be something buried there, and you have to go and inspect the area before you enter, before a kohen would enter, you become tummy there? Arba'im yayim, 40 days. As Rashi explains, if the guy lived there for 40 days, so that's the amount of time that it takes for a baby the yitziras avlad, the formation of a fetus is 40 days. So therefore after that we're afraid that could be there was a stillborn that was buried there. This is even in a case where he's not even married. Because a guy living there, you never know who he has a relationship with, never know who he brings into his house. So therefore Chachamim were geyser, they instituted that all places where a guy lives has a status of tumah. However, then the Mishnah there says, but if a guy is living in a house, and it's a place where there's a chazer or there's a weasel that comes in and out, so then ein tzarich bedike. That's a place where you don't have to inspect it, and there is no status of tumah there, and the reason is because you rely on the fact that this chazer or this chulda ate up whatever was placed there, and there's no tumah. If so, the question is, let's apply the same thing here regarding chametz. Even if you saw a chulda dragging your chametz, bringing it into a house, why do you have to go inspect the house, do bedika again? Why can't you rely on the fact that the chulda goes and eats it? And Taisus here points out that this question of the Gemara, that you could rely on the chulda eating what it dragged, Taisus in the Ve'im Timtzalaima, at the end of that Taisus, he says, it's Karev Levadai. It's a Safek Aragel, Karev Levadai. This is the nature of an animal. This is the nature of this weasel or whatever it is, a mouse that's dragging it, that it eats up what it drags. Doesn't just leave it, put it away. Usually it eats it up. So this is something you could rely on. So why aren't we relying on this? Rab Zayda says, Rab Zayda, there's a difference. Loi kashya. Ha bebasar. In that Mishnah that we were quoting, you're talking about burying a stillborn. It's basar, it's meat. So that's something that the animal will eat up. But vaha belechem. And here we're talking about dragging chametz, bread. Bebasar loy meshayda. With meat, the animal eats it and doesn't leave anything over. Belechem, but with bread, meshayda. That's something that a animal will eat, but also leave over. So therefore, even if you saw it coming into the house, and you should be able to rely on it eating it, but nevertheless, it's possible the leftover. So you can't compare to that Mishnah. Rava says, no. Hi, mai. What kind of a comparison is there here to our Mishnah? Bishloi mahasam. In that case, where we're talking about a tumah, a concern of tumah, and Chachamim decreed that the house should have a status of tumah. Eima hava, eima loy hava. The status that Chachamim gave to the house is not based on something that we know, that we saw, that this person buried a stillborn. It's a suffix. Vim tim tzalei mahave. So since the whole thing is a suffix in the first place, so even if it is true that there was a baby that was buried there, we could rely on the fact that a chazer, a chulda that's in that area came and ate it. Aval hacha, but over here, what was our question? The vadai, the chazina, the shakal. In a case where you saw a chulda dragging the chametz into the house. Mi emed achalte. So how could you rely on the fact that it ate it up? Have a suffix. The fact that it eats it is still a suffix. It's not a definite. Uvadai. And the fact that you saw it bringing it into the house was something that was definite, that you saw that the chametz was brought into the house. And then we have a rule, the ein suffix maitzi midei vadai. A suffix, when you have something that is only a doubt, it might have happened, it can't remove a previous status that's a definite fact that you saw. Over here, you saw definitely that the chulda brought the chametz into the house. The possibility that it may have eaten it will not remove that status that you saw that it brought it into the house. So this concept of ein suffix meitzim devada is brought in the Gemara in many places. The chiddush specifically in our Gemara is, as I pointed out before, Taisva says that the suffix of the chulda or the chazer eating up the chametz is something which is in its nature to do. It's not just a 50-50 suffix that it might have eaten it, it might have not eaten it. It's something which is within the nature of the animal to eat it up. So even relying on something which is the nature of the animal to do, so it's more than just a 50-50 suffix. Let's say there's a 75% or maybe even more of a chance that it actually ate it up. Nevertheless, the minion is next door. Right over here, yeah. So even if it's a case where it's mamish so clear that it probably ate it up, but nevertheless, it's not as clear as you seeing the animal bringing the chametz in there, so therefore it's a suffix that's maitzi from a vadai. And then we have the klal of ein suffix maitzi midei vadai. Now the Gemara is going to bring a few questions on this rule. Ein suffix maitzi midei vadai, is that true? When you have a suffix, it cannot remove the status of a vadai? But we learned in a braisa, chaver shemeis, and we had this before in the Gemara. A person that's a chaver, he's a person that's reliable to take the meiser that you need to take from your produce. When he passed away, v'hiniach megura melea peiris, he leaves a storage filled with fruits, and you don't know if meiser was taken or not. Afilahem b'nei yaiman, even if it was today, this is fresh fruits that was brought into the storage today, harehem b'cheskas mesukanin, you could rely on this chaver that he probably took the meiser necessary. So asks the Gemara, how are you relying on that? V'hahacha de vadai tvili hani peiri. These peiris, this produce that grew here, was definitely tevel. Tevel is the fruits before meiser is taken. It's called tevel. So we know for sure that it grew and it was brought in and it was once tevel. Usafik musarin, safik lay musarin. And now you have a doubt of what happened over here. We don't know. We know that it grew and it was obligated to meiser to be taken, but we don't know whether this person that passed away took the meiser or not, and he's not here to ask him. V'ka'asi safik u'maitzim midevadai. And we're using over here a certain assumption. We're assuming that this chaver is probably fulfilling his obligations like he always usually does, and he probably fulfilled his obligation here as well. But it's only an assumption. True, it's an assumption that's based on a certain status that we know that a chaver usually fulfills his obligation. But in the end of the day, it's only an assumption. But the status that the fruits, the produce had, l'chatchila, was It's something that you know for a fact that it grew and it was tevel. So the Gemara's question over here is, this is a case of a suffix which is Maitzi Midei Vadai. V'ka'asi suffix Maitzi Midei Vadai. So again, as I pointed out, the Chiddush over here in our Gemara is that, not that we have a 50-50 suffix that's going to uproot the status of a vadai. That's obvious that you can't do. The question of the Gemara is, even a chaver, where there's an assumption that he actually fulfills his obligation, but it's still not as definite as the fact that you know that this grew on the tree and it was chayiv and maisris, and the maisris wasn't taken. Now you're relying on a certain assumption that this individual took the maiser. How could you rely on an assumption without asking him if you know for sure that it grew and it was chayiv and maisris? And says the Gemara, no, this assumption is very strong. Hasam vadai uvadaihu. The fact that we rely on this chaver to take these maisres, that's a status of a definite thing. You're relying on an assumption that's as strong as a vadai. And therefore that could uproot the vadai status that it had, that maiser had to be taken. The vadai maisri. A chaver is a person that you could rely on the fact that he took maisres, and it's a definite thing. Like Rab Chanina Chuzah said, the Amar Rab Chanina Chuzah, chazoke al chaver. There's an assumption, there's a very strong assumption on a chaver, she'ein moitzi mitachas yadei davar she'eino mesoken. He does not allow anything out of his hands that is not going to be done properly. So over here regarding maisres, if he brought in the storage of these fruits into his house, we rely on the fact that he definitely took the maisres here. So Rashi here explains that the chazaka of this chaver is based on a roiv. If you look into the Rashi, Hasam vadai uvadaihu, so Rashi says this is based on roiv, because most people that are on the status of a chaver take the maiser, and therefore the chiddush of our Gemara is, when you rely on a roiv, the status of a roiv is so definite, just like something you saw with your own eyes. So you know for a fact these trees, these fruits grew over here, and they were chayiv and maisres. Relying on the roiv is just as powerful as something that you saw with your own eyes. That's chiddush over here in this answer of the Gemara. Another answer the Gemara gives, Safik v'safiku. Actually, the obligation of giving maisers for these fruits is not so definite. The fact that it grew and you have the fruits here doesn't mean that it was definitely obligated for maisers. It's actually a doubt. Why? Dilme meikare eme deloi tevili. Could be that it's possible that these fruits were never obligated in Maisa. Why wasn't it obligated in Maisa? Kerabaishia. Like Rabaishia says, in order for fruits to become obligated in Maisa, there are two conditions. It has to have been the process of taking it off the tree and preparing it and bringing it, has to have been done properly. If we're talking about fruits, so you just basically gather the fruits. But if you're talking about grain, so you cut the grain and then you have to there's different parts of the process until you bring it into the storage. You're not bringing in the stalks of the grain that you cut into the storage. You have to take out the kernels and you take off the chaff and you bring it into the house. So there's the process of finishing it before you bring it into the house, and then it has to be brought into the house. Only after it's brought to the house, and only if it's brought as a finished product into the house and it's being stored there, then it's obligated in Meiser. Rabbi Shia says, Mayrim Adam al Tvuasai. A person could sort of do a trick with his Meiser, with his grain, Umachnisa b'moitz shelo. And you bring it into your house with the mites, with the chaff. You didn't yet prepare it. The process of removing the peel, the shell of it wasn't done properly, and you bring it into the house that way. Kidei shetehei behemto yecheles. Your behemi eats from it. Uptura min hamaiser. And in such a case, when you bring it into the house as an unprocessed, unfinished product, it's going to be potter from meiser. Only if you brought it into the house after it was a finished product, then it's obligated in meiser. So therefore, when you have these fruits or this grain that this person that passed away left in the house, it's not a case where it's definitely obligated in Meiser. It could be it was obligated in Meiser, could be not. So therefore, the fact that we rely on an assumption that he took the Meisris is relying on an assumption to uproot a status or an obligation to give Meiser, which is also not a definite thing. So it's not a case of using a suffix, using an assumption to uproot a previous status, which is with Vadai. The Gemara now brings another case and asks the same question again. Could you not have a suffix that would uproot a status of a vadai? For Hatanya, Rabbi Yehuda said the following story. There was the story of a maidservant, of a meitzik, of this violent person. That's the simple translation of the word meitzik. Other Rishonim do not have the word meitzik in the Gemara. They have a word masik, which refers to a person that works out in the field. There was a story with this person that had a maidservant, Berimain, living in the city Rimain, Sheitila Neiful Labar. So there was a stillborn, and she threw the baby into a pit. Now a kohen came along, and he wanted to inspect the stillborn to see what it was. V'hitzitz by, and he glanced into the pit, leida, to know im zacharhu, if it was a male, or im nekevihi, or if it was a female. And as Rashi says, the reason why he was inspecting to see this is to know regarding the status of the mother, if the mother is tamei or not, how long the tumah lasts. The tumah of a mother that gives birth to a nekeva or to a zachar is different, as it says in Parshas Tazriah. The length of the tumah is not the same. So this kayin wanted to see the tumah for the mother to how long it was. Tosfos here points out that from this Gemara it would seem that a shivcha kananis would also have the halachas of tumah, because we're talking over here about a story with a shivcha shal meitzik echad. So even a shivcha kananis that's giving birth to a stillborn also has a halachas of tumah. But then Tosfos brings another pshat and says, not necessarily was this the baby of the shivcha kananis. It could be that this shivcha kananis took a baby of her master, or of another woman, of a Yiddish woman, and threw it into a pit. And this kayin, very silly idea. The kayin shouldn't be around things that are tamei, or shouldn't be the one inspecting this. But a kayin comes along and glances into a pit to see what the story is. What it was, a male or female. Uba ma'aseh lefnei chachamim. And so this came in front of the chachamim. They asked the chachamim, "What's the story with this kayin?" Because he bent over the pit. So when you bend over a pit, you're creating an oil. You're creating this covering over the pit, and therefore the tumah comes up, and you become tamei. So the question is, will this kayin be tamei? V'tiyaruhu, and the kayin, the chachamim said that this kayin is pure. He's tahir. Did not become tamei. Why? Because over here in this pit, there is a weasel, there's a bardless, some other kind of animal that's there in that area, and we rely on the fact that it was eaten up, that the chulda, that the neifel, the stillborn that was placed there, was not there anymore. So the kayin is not tamei. So now the Gemara's question is, v'hahacha the vaday hitila. Here it's a case that you know for a fact that this stillborn was thrown into the pit. The safik gereru, safik loy gereru, hayi shaita. And it's a doubt. It's unclear whether a chulda came and dragged away the stillborn or not. We don't know that for sure. The ka'asi safik, and they're relying on this doubt, this possibility that maybe it was dragged away. Umaytzi midei vaday. And it's removing and it's changing the status of the definite fact that we know that the stillborn was thrown in there. So we see that a safik, yeah, obviously, correct. If you would have seen it, it wasn't there. So the kayin didn't see anything, but maybe it was there, maybe he just couldn't see. But over here, we see that we're using a safik to remove the status of a vaday. Says the Gemara, no, maybe the story there happened a bit differently. Don't read the story that it happened, that there was a neifel, there was a stillborn that was thrown into the pit, that there was a miscarriage, and it was thrown into the pit, but it was kimin neifel, meaning v'haveh safik or safik. There's a safik whether b'chlal this was a stillborn or not, meaning if the miscarriage was very early on in the pregnancy, so then it's not even something considered to be any source of tumah, because it's not yet developed enough to be a baby, a stillborn, that it's a source of tumah. So there was something of a miscarriage that was thrown into a pit, but you're not even sure b'chlal if it was a stillborn or not. So therefore the whole incident in the beginning is a doubt. So therefore it's a case of a safik, and therefore we rely on a safik that perhaps a weasel dragged it away, that this kayin would not be tamei. But the Gemara doesn't accept this. But it clearly spells out in the story that there was a baby, a stillborn, and it was just a doubt whether it was a male or female. But there was a stillborn here. So how could we say that this is the pshat in the Braisa? Says the Gemara, Hachi Ka'amar. This is how you have to read the Braisa. Leida, this Kayin was looking to see, Im Ruach Hipila, Im Neifel Hipila. Was it just a Ruach? Ruach over here, I mean, the simple translation of Ruach is ear, meaning it was a baby or a miscarriage that wasn't yet even developed. There's nothing, this very early on in the pregnancy, and therefore there's no source of tumah there. Or was it actually a stillborn of a baby? That's one thing that the Kohen was inspecting. Ve'im tim tzeleiman neiful, and if it was a stillborn, he pila leida im zachar hu vim nekevihi. He also was inspecting to see whether it was male or female. So he was inspecting both to see b'chlal whether there's any tumah here, and also to see whether it was a zachar or a nekeva. That's one pshat in this braisa. So it's a suffix in the first place. Another pshat is v'bayseim Hasam vadai uvadaihu. There, yes, we know that there was a stillborn thrown into this pit, but also this that we're saying that a chulda drags it away, that's something we could rely on as a definite thing. Kivin the chulda bardless mitzuyin sham. If there is a weasel and another animal that pulls it away, vadai gararu bahi shaita. They definitely dragged it away. Nihi the shiyurim mishaita. True, it's possible that if they ate it up, they could leave over something, but migrar mie vade gararum. We could definitely rely on the fact that they dragged it away. You have this pit, and the pit may have some holes inside of it, or wherever it is, it definitely dragged it into some hole to keep it for itself. But it might have left over something, but in the pit, we rely on the fact that it's a definite thing that a chulda and bardalis definitely dragged it away. Okay, so therefore, it's a vadai and a vadai. Migrar mies vadai gararum bahishaita, they definitely dragged it away. Okay, now the Gemara comes back to something else. Going back to the Mishnah itself. What did it say in the Mishnah itself? When Chachamim made the takana for bedika, they did not institute to be concerned also about an animal coming and dragging away the food for chametz from one corner to another, from one house to another, from one courtyard to another. Because if you're going to be concerned about that, you could never address this. This is something the Chachamim did not include in their takana. Asks the Gemara, is that the case? So is it true that Chachamim were not concerned about the fact that a chulda will come and drag your chametz? But what does it say in the next Mishnah that we'll learn tomorrow? In the next Mishnah it says, the chametz, after you finish doing your bedikah, the night before Pesach, and you're leaving over chametz, you want to eat for the next day. So this that you're leaving over, yanichenu b'tzina. You have to put it and hide it in a place. Shelo yehei tzarich bedika achro. So you shouldn't have to do bedika again. If you leave it in an exposed place, what could happen? A chulda could come and take your chametz and drag it somewhere else in the house, and then you won't know where it is. So over here in the next Mishnah, we clearly see that we are concerned about the fact that a chulda will drag your chametz if you leave it exposed. Amar Abaye says Abaye loy kashya. That's not a question. Ha barba asar, ha b'shloisha asar. There's a difference if it's on the 14th day, on Erev Pesach, after Chatzos already, when all the chametz is gone, and ha b'shloisha asar. Or we're talking about shloisha asar a day before, on the 13th day of Nisan. What's the difference? B'shloisha asar the shchiach rifte b'kula bati. On the 13th day of Nisan, when there's so much chametz, there's still bread in all the houses. Loi matzno. So even if a chulda will come and drag your chametz, it's not going to go and hide it. Why isn't it going to go and hide it? Because it sees there's so much food around available, there's so much bread around in the houses, so it's not concerned that it won't have enough, and therefore the chulda that drags the chametz will leave it exposed. So you'll see where it takes it to. Barbas, or it comes the next day and the houses are so clean. The loy shchicha rifte, and there's no bread anymore in the houses, bekula bati, and all the houses matzna. So now the chulda drags the chametz. It's going to hide the chametz, it's going to take it and put it away somewhere because it sees that the houses are all clean. So only on the 14th day do we say that we're concerned about the fact that the chulda is going to drag it and you're not going to see where it puts it. So therefore you shouldn't leave your chametz exposed. That's a bias pshat. Omar Rava, so Rava asks on this, how could you say this? Is this weasel a prophet? That it knows the Yada, that it knows the Ha'idna, Arbesa, that today it's Erev Pesach, it's the 14th day of Nisan, V'lo ad le'orte, and they're not going to be baking today anymore, and they're not going to be baking until tomorrow. Umeshaira, and therefore it leaves over for itself. Umetamera, and it hides it. How can we make these distinctions over here regarding a chulda, that on the 13th day it sees chametz, so it has enough, and on the 14th day it's going to hide it? Doesn't accept this teretz. Elo marave. So Rava says the pshat is different. Masha mishaya yanichenu b'tzina. You know what it means in the next Mishnah when it says that once you did bedika and you have chametz that you're leaving for yourself, take that chametz and put it away to eat. The reason is shema titul chulda b'faneinu v'yehei tzarich bedika. Possibly you will see a chulda entering into your house and dragging the chametz, and then you won't be able to follow it. You won't know where to put it. If you see a chulda, like we said before, if you see the weasel coming and taking your chametz, so then you definitely have to go and find that chametz that it took. That's the concern. The Mishnah that we had over here was saying that we're not going to be concerned that a chulda came if you didn't see it. To be concerned that a chulda is going from house to house, and especially in those times, see, we're living today in a different world. In those times, you have a chulda coming, there's weasels, there's cats, and there's mice, and all kinds of animals that are going from house to house and place to place. We're not going to be concerned about this. If you are, it's never an end. But if it's a case where you saw a chulda entering into your house, then you have to follow it. You have to go and see where it put the chametz. That's what we're concerned about. Tanya Kvasei de Rava, in a Braisa it says exactly like Rava said, Hareitze lechel chametz acha bedike, if you want to leave over chametz after bedike, to eat from it, Keitzad Yasa, what do you do? Masha Meshaya and Echena Betzina, what you're leaving over for yourself, put it away somewhere, Shalei Tove chulde v'titel b'faneinu, so that a weasel does not come and take the chametz in front of you. You see it taking the chametz, and then v'yehei tzarech bedike, you'll have to do bedike acharav. So in this Braisa it clearly said, the concern is b'fanav, that you might see the weasel coming and then you'll have to do bedika again. A third answer the Gemara gives, Rav Mari says, Rav Mari Amar, Gizeire Shema Yaniach Eser. What might happen is, if you have piles of food or you have pieces of bread, you might put down 10 pieces of bread, and you come back and you only find 9 pieces of bread. If there's only 9 pieces there, then you know that 1 piece of bread was taken. So you're going to have to go and find it. In a case where you have no idea what happened, so in such a case you don't have to be concerned. But if you see there's only 9 pieces, then in such a case you'll have to go and find it. So therefore, put away the food that you keep for the next day in a safe place that a chulda can't reach it, a child can't reach it, so when you come back tomorrow, you should find your pieces of bread that you put there. Our Gemara, that it says that Shema Yaniach Eser, is a remes to the minig that we have to put 10 pieces of bread. Even though the minig that we put 10 pieces of bread has no source in Gemara and Pesachim, it's a minig that was developed in later generations. But there's a remes here in the Gemara that says that Yaniach Eser, that you put down 10 pieces. Okay, now the Gemara brings up a bunch of different scenarios where a person put down one number of chametz, or a certain amount of chametz, or he placed chametz in a place, and a weasel came and dragged something, and there's a suffix exactly what happened, and what's going to be the halacha. Do you have to be concerned about this? What do you do about this? So the Gemara starts with the first case. Teisha tziburin shel matzah. If you have 10 piles of matzah, ve'echad shel chametz, and then you have 1 pile of chametz, va'asa achbar v'shakal, and a mouse comes and took a piece of one of these piles. You saw the mouse taking something from one of these piles. V'lo yadina ni matzah shakal I chametz shakal, but you couldn't see which pile it took it from. Did it take it from one of the 9 piles of matzah, or did it take it from 1 pile of chametz? So what's the halacha? Do you have to be concerned about this? All right, so what you have over here, a roiv. There's 9 piles of matzah and 1 pile of chametz. Could you rely on that roiv? Says the Gemara, it depends. Hainu teisha chanuyos. This is the exact halacha of the case of 9 stores. What's the story of 9 stores? If you have 9 stores that are selling kosher meat, basa shchuta. You have 1 store that's selling non-kosher meat. And you went to 1 store, and you forgot which store you went into. Did I go into the kosher store or into the non-kosher store? Could you eat that meat? So the halacha is, no, you can't. Since you have a suffix which store you entered into, so you can't rely on the meat that you bought and say, oh, most stores are kosher, so I can rely on the fact that I probably went into a kosher store. No. Because you entered into the store, this is what's called kavua. You entered into a place which is established, which is permanent, which is stationary, and you went into that place. You're not sure where you went into. You do not rely on reiv in such a place, and you can't eat the meat. The same thing over here. You saw a chulda coming to a stationary place where you have piles of chametz, or 1 pile of chametz, and 9 piles of matzah. So you have a doubt now. What happened? Did it come to the pile of chametz or the pile of matzah? So these are stationary in their place, and your suffix began in a place which is kavua, which is permanent and stationary. You can't rely on reiv in such a case, and you're going to have to go and do bedika again. How about if it's another case? Pirish. If the piece that was taken was removed from its stationary place, va'asa achbar v'shakal, and now the achbar, the mouse, comes and takes this piece, and you're not sure what it is that it took. Hainu Sefer, that's the second case in the Mishnah there, which talks about a place where a person found chametz outside the store. Not that he entered into a store. He found chametz, or actually meat. He found meat outside the store, and you're not sure which store it came from. It's outside the store. You didn't enter into the establishment, into the place itself. Over there, you do follow the Raiv. Hainu Seife. This is the second part of the Mishnah. So let's see what it says there in this Mishnah. This is a Mishnah in Chulin, or it's actually a Braisa. And over there, this is the source of this inyan of it's in Ksubis and Chulin, a few places where it discusses this halacha of Raiv versus Kavua. Let's see the lashon of the Mishnah inside. So the Mishnah says, or the Braisa says, Teish Achanuyais, you have 9 stores, Kulan Meichres Basashchuta. They're all selling kosher meat. Va'achas Mecheres Basanavela. There's one non-kosher store selling the vela. V'lokach me'achas mehen. You went into one of these stores to buy the meat. Ve'eni yedeya meizem en lokach. You're not sure which store you went into. Sfeikai aser. So you have this doubt, it's going to be aser. Ubenimtza, however, if you did not enter into one of these stores, but you found the meat outside, and you're not sure what these stores does the meat come from, then you do follow the Raiv. So this is the source of this concept that you find in many places in Gemara. There's Raiv and Kavua. When you enter in a place which is Kavua, so then you don't follow Raiv. But if it's outside the store, you didn't enter into a place that's Kavua, then you do follow the Raiv. Right? Okay, now this concept of Raiv and Kavua, these are learned out from Psukim. This Psukim, the Gemara in Ksubis brings Psukim for this to learn out this concept that by Kavua you don't follow Raiv. Now, simply speaking, it might be difficult to understand what the Gemara is saying here. What difference does it make if you entered into the store or if you find the meat in the street? The fact is, in both cases, you have a Raiv here. There is a Raiv stores that are kosher that you could follow to determine the fact that you did take the kosher meat. What difference does it make where you went into? But the simple pshat over here is that the very idea to follow Raiv is something which the Torah is machadish, because really, even if there's just a minority of stores that are not kosher, that's enough for you to have a doubt that maybe the meat is not kosher and you shouldn't be allowed to eat it. So what does a Raiv? But how about the fact that there's a 10%, there's a 15, 20% chance that you went into the not kosher store? Isn't that enough of reason that you shouldn't be allowed to use the meat over here that might have come from that store? Elamai, the Torah was machadish. The Torah said that you could follow Raiv, that you can go according to the percent of Raiv that says that the probability of you going into the store that was kosher is more than the probability of going into the store that's not kosher. That's a chiddush of the Torah. If the Torah wouldn't say so, I would say that you have to be concerned about the percent that you might have gone into a store that was not kosher. But the same Torah comes along and says that there's a limitation to following Raiv. I don't always follow Raiv. If the minority is something which is choshev, which is kavua, and because it's kavua, it's established and it's stationary, it has a certain chshivus, a certain significance, I can't dismiss the minority. I can't dismiss that probability. Every time you say Raiv, you're dismissing a certain probability of a miyut that's there. But the Torah says this chiddush that I follow Raiv doesn't always apply. If that minority is stationary and significant, I have to pay attention to that, and I'm going to have to be stringent and follow the kavua. That's the concept of kavua that doesn't allow you to follow Raiv. So the same thing applies over here to the chametz and the matzah. The Gemara brings out, now before I go weiter, there is a machlekes here between Rashi and Tosfos, what this Gemara that we just learned is talking about. Rashi holds that the Gemara here is discussing bedika. Do I have to do bedika again in such a case? And we're discussing the mitzvah of bedika midrabanan. The person did bittul, and we're discussing bedika. According to Tosfos, we're not discussing bedika. We're discussing a question of whether the person that finds that bread or that piece that was dragged from these piles, similar to what we had before in the Gemara, in those times you see this piece, you can't even tell if it's chametz or matzah. The chametz and the matzah in those times looked very similar to each other. And now the question is, are you allowed to eat it? That's what the Gemara is discussing. You found it, now you want to know if you can eat it or not. That was the question here. Okay, next case. Says the Gemara, what happens if you have shnei tziburin? You have 2 piles. Echad shel matzah, 1 pile of matzah, vechad shel chametz, and 1 pile of chametz. Ulefneim shnei batim, and there are 2 houses here. Echad baduk, 1 house bedika was done, it's clean for Pesach. Ve'echad she'eino baduk. Another house bedika was not done, it's not clean for Pesach yet. Now va'asu shnei achbarim, and here you have 2 mice. Echad shakal matzah, 1 dragged a piece of matzah. Ve'echad shakal chametz, and 1 dragged a piece of chametz. And they both, these 2 mice, took these pieces and went into the houses. V'lo yadinon hai lahai ayil v'hai lahai ayil. You don't know which mouse took which piece into which house. So if you're lucky, so the one that took matzah entered into the house where the bedika was done. And the one that took the chametz entered into the house where the bedika was not done yet. But you don't know. Maybe it was the other way around. So do you have to do bedika again? Says the Gemara, we can be lenient and rely on the fact that the one that took chametz went into the chametz house. Hainu shtei kupais, and we find a similar thing regarding two boxes or two baskets. What's the case of the two baskets? The Tanan, we learned in the Mishnah or in the Braise, the Tanya, shtei kupais, you have two baskets. Achas shel chulin, one contains chulin, produce, v'achas shel truma, and the other one contains truma. Ulifneim shnei soin, and in front of them there are two measurements of produce that are there. Echad shel chulin, one is of chulin, v'echad shel truma, and the other one is of truma. V'naflu elu l'toich elu, and what was sitting there outside fell into these baskets. And you're not sure what fell into which basket. Did the chulin fall into the truma basket? Did the truma fall into the chulin basket? Or did each one, did the chulin fall into chulin and truma fell into truma, and everything is good? What does the Mishnah say? Or the Braisa say? Elu mutarin. Mutarin. Mutarin, it's allowed. We can rely on the fact that the chulin fell into the chulin and truma fell into the truma. Okay, so the same thing over here, the Gemara says, so the Braisa there continues and explains, She'ani oimer, because I assume and I say, chulin l'toich chulin naflu, the chulin fell into the basket of chulin, utruma l'toich trumat nafla, and the truma fell into the basket of truma. Same thing over here, I rely on the fact that the chametz was dragged into the house of chametz, and the matzah was dragged into the house of matzah. Says the Gemara, no, you can't compare to that Braisa. Why not? When do I apply such a kind of a leniency? This is really a very big leniency here, because if there's no roivir, I don't really have something solid to rely on. When do I rely on such a leniency? But Truma derabanan. That Braisa was talking about Truma today. Truma today is only midirabanan. Truma that's midirabanan, I can rely on such a leniency. B'chametz the Eiraisa, but by an Isser of chametz, which is minatayra mi amrinan, could I rely on such a kind of leniency that the achba dragged the chametz into a house which is already which is not yet checked, and the matzah was taken into the house that was checked? Mi amrinan, do I say such a thing? Says the Gemara, no. What are we talking about here? Atu bedikas chametz da'iraisa, is bedikas chametz min ha'teire derabbanani. It's also midirabanan. The midiraisa bebitl ba'masagile. We're talking here about a case where the person did his bittul, so min ha'teire there's no issue, and the whole question of ears that we're discussing is also only midirabanan. So therefore we compare it to that Mishnah which is discussing truma bizman hazeh, which is also only midirabanan, and therefore we're lenient about this, and we assume that the chametz that went into the chametz house and the matzah went into the matzah house.